He declared himself a god. Then, according to Roman historians, he ordered his soldiers to go to war against the ocean. They stabbed the water with their swords, again and again. This was not a myth. This was Rome. And the man who gave that command was the most powerful person on earth. His name was Caligula, and by the time he did this, he had already lost his mind. But here's the question no one seems to ask. Did power make him insane, or does power simply reveal what was always there? Because this wasn't just one emperor, it wasn't just Rome. This pattern repeats. Different empires, different centuries, same outcome. A ruler rises, they conquer, they build, and then something shifts. They stop serving the people, they start consuming them. And once that line is crossed, almost no ruler ever finds the way back. This is what happens after the empire is built. This is when power stops being a tool and becomes a need, an addiction. And the cost of that addiction is measured in bodies. Let's start with Nero. He became emperor at 17. Too young, too much, too fast. At first, he seemed normal. He had advisors. He listened. He even tried to be loved. But within a few years, something changed. He stopped asking for approval. He started demanding worship. He killed his mother, then his wife, then anyone who questioned him. And when a fire destroyed half of Rome, people whispered that he started it himself. Not because he hated the city, but because he wanted to rebuild it in his image, to make it his, completely. Historians still argue about whether he actually played the liar while Rome burned, but the story stuck because it fit. It matched the man he had become, someone who saw destruction as entertainment, a man surrounded by marble palaces and burning cities who felt nothing but entitlement. Here's what makes this disturbing. Nero didn't think he was doing anything wrong. He believed he was entitled to it. Because when you're told from birth that you are chosen by the gods, that you are above the law, that you are the law, why would you ever stop yourself? This is the divine ruler problem, and it didn't start in Rome. Go back further. Ancient Egypt. The pharaohs weren't just kings, they were gods walking among men. That wasn't metaphor, that was official doctrine. The entire system was built on it. The pyramids, the temples, the tombs, all of it designed to reinforce one idea. The pharaoh is immortal. The pharaoh is divine. The pharaoh cannot be questioned. And when you convince an entire civilization that one person is a god, what do you think happens to that person? They believe it. China had the mandate of heaven. If you ruled, it was because the heavens allowed it. If you were overthrown, it meant the heavens had withdrawn their blessing. But while you held power, you were untouchable. You were the Son of Heaven, and the Son of Heaven does not answer to mortals. Dynasty after dynasty, the pattern repeated. A strong emperor rises, unites the land, brings prosperity. Then his son takes over, or his grandson, and they inherit the power, but not the struggle. They were born into it. They never had to fight for it, so they don't respect it. They just use it.
And the more they use it, the more they need it. Power doesn't satisfy, it amplifies. It removes restraint. And the more someone gets, the more they need, because there is no such thing as enough. Louis XIV of France was famously credited with saying, "I am the state." Not "I serve the state," not "I represent the state," "I am the state." And he meant it. Laws were whatever he decided. Justice was whatever he wanted. The country was an extension of his will. He called himself the Sun King, not because he was warm or life-giving, because everything revolved around him. He built Versailles to prove it, the largest palace in Europe, thousands of rooms, hundreds of servants, all to contain the ego of one man. And the people? They didn't matter. Not as individuals. They mattered only as fuel, to build, to fight, to glorify. This is where it gets dangerous, because it's not just about one crazy emperor anymore. It's about the system that creates them. It's about what happens when absolute power is treated as a birthright instead of a responsibility. Go back to Caligula. Before the ocean incident, before the madness everyone talks about, there was a moment when people loved him. He was young, charismatic, he threw games, he gave money to the people. He seemed like the anti-Tiberius, the emperor before him who had become paranoid and cruel. But then Caligula got sick, some kind of fever. He nearly died, and when he recovered, he wasn't the same. Some historians think the illness damaged his brain. Others think it just removed his fear of death. Either way, what came after was unrecognizable. He started building a bridge across the Bay of Baiae, not because it was needed, because someone once said it was impossible. So he did it just to prove he could. He rode across it wearing the armor of Alexander the Great, because in his mind, he wasn't just an emperor, he was a conqueror, a legend, a god. And when people didn't worship him enough, he made them. He ordered statues of himself placed in temples. He demanded sacrifices in his name. He even planned to put his statue in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, which would have triggered a revolt. His advisors barely talked him out of it. But here's the thing. Caligula wasn't unique. His actions were extreme, yes, but the psychology behind them, that's everywhere. And this next part is where it turns truly disturbing. Think about what he actually did. He reportedly planned to make his horse a consul. Whether this was madness or deliberate humiliation of the Senate, the message was clear. You're all so useless, I might as well replace you with an animal. That's not crazy. That's contempt with a purpose. That's someone who stopped seeing the Senate as partners and started seeing them as props, as decorations in his personal theater. And the Senate? They went along with it because they had no choice. Because by that point, opposing Caligula meant death. He had already executed dozens of senators, their families too. So when he threatened to elevate a horse above them, they stayed silent. They nodded. They pretended it made sense.
That's the system protecting itself. That's how tyranny sustains. Not through constant violence, through the threat of it. Through making people complicit in their own humiliation. Now, fast forward. Different empire, same psychology. Emperor Qin Shi Huang of China, the man who unified the country, built the Great Wall, created the Terracotta Army, a visionary by some accounts, a monster by others. He believed in immortality, not as a concept, as a goal. He sent expeditions across the sea to find the elixir of life. He consumed mercury because alchemists told him it would make him eternal. It didn't. It poisoned him, slowly. And as he died, he became more paranoid, more violent, more desperate. According to historical records, scholars were executed and texts destroyed, part of his attempt to control knowledge, to erase everything that came before him. Why? Because he wanted to be the beginning. He didn't want to be compared to anyone. He wanted to be the first, the only, the eternal. And here's what no one tells you. He almost succeeded, not in living forever, but in being remembered forever, because we're still talking about him, 2,000 years later. His tomb still hasn't been fully excavated. His army of statues still guards his body. In a way, he did become immortal. But at what cost? Vast numbers of workers died building his tomb. Entire families were wiped out for questioning him. He didn't just want power. He wanted to control reality itself, to shape history, to decide what was true. If you're still watching, you already get it. Because this isn't just about ancient emperors. This is about what happens when someone believes their vision is more important than human life, when they believe the end justifies any means, when they stop seeing themselves as human and start seeing themselves as destiny. And once that shift happens, there's no limit to what they'll do. And sometimes the monster wears a crown inherited from a philosopher. Take Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, one of Rome's greatest emperors. Marcus was a philosopher, a Stoic. He believed in duty, self-control, virtue. He wrote Meditations, one of the most important works of ancient philosophy. And then he died, and his son took over. Commodus was the opposite of everything his father stood for. He didn't want to think, he wanted to be worshipped. He didn't want to serve Rome, he wanted Rome to serve him. He fought as a gladiator in the Colosseum, not in private, in public, in front of thousands. He killed animals, he fought rigged matches against injured opponents, and he forced the Senate to watch, to cheer, to celebrate him as a god made flesh. And they did, because what choice did they have? But here's the part that makes your skin crawl. Commodus didn't just fight for fun. He charged the Roman treasury for every appearance, every kill, every performance. He billed the state. He made the empire pay to watch him play God. And the empire did, because by then, the system was so broken that no one could stop him.
The Praetorian Guard was loyal to him, the Senate was terrified of him, the people were distracted by the spectacle. So he drained the treasury, he bankrupted Rome, and he did it all while wearing a lion skin and calling himself Hercules. This is what the addiction looks like. Not just to power, to the feeling power gives you, the applause, the fear, the confirmation that you are special, that you were chosen, that you are beyond human limits.
And the deeper you go, the more you lose touch with reality, because reality becomes whatever you say it is. If you say you're a god, people call you a god. If you say the ocean is your enemy, soldiers stab the waves. If you say your horse deserves a Senate seat, no one dares laugh. The world bends to you, until it breaks. At this point in history, the pattern is undeniable. Now think about this. Every single one of these emperors had advisors, people who knew better, people who could see what was happening. So why didn't they stop it? Some tried and died. Others stayed silent and survived. But most did something worse. They enabled it. They fed the delusion. They built the temples. They wrote the propaganda. They organized the games. Because their power came from the emperor's power. If he fell, they fell. So they propped him up. They told him he was right. They turned his madness into policy. And when he finally collapsed, they moved on to the next one, and the cycle started again. This is the invisible half of the addiction. It's not just the ruler who's hooked, it's everyone around him. The system itself becomes dependent. The economy, the military, the religion, all of it built around the idea that one person is holding it together. And when that person is insane, the entire empire goes insane with him. Nero didn't burn Rome alone. He had architects, engineers, workers, people who carried out his vision, people who knew it was wrong but did it anyway, because orders are orders, because the alternative was death, because maybe some of them believed in him. That's the scariest part. Some people actually bought into it. They actually believed Nero was a god, that Caligula was divinely chosen, that Commodus was Hercules reborn, not because of evidence, because they needed to believe, because belief gave their lives meaning, purpose, structure. And when you give people structure, they'll defend it, even when it's killing them. Louis XIV understood this. He didn't just build Versailles for himself, he built it to trap the nobility. He forced them to live there, to compete for his attention, to spend their fortunes on clothing and etiquette and performances. He turned them into courtiers, into dependents, into addicts. And it worked. The French nobles stopped threatening him. They stopped plotting. They stopped thinking of themselves as rivals because they were too busy trying to impress him, too busy fighting each other for scraps of his approval. He didn't crush the aristocracy. He seduced it. And by the time they realized what happened, they were too deep to escape. This is how power becomes a drug for everyone, not just the person at the top. The people below get hooked on proximity, on access, on the chance that maybe, if they play the game right, some of that power will trickle down to them. So they play along. They laugh at the jokes, they applaud the madness, they stay silent when the horse is elevated, because the alternative is admitting the whole thing is a lie. And if it's a lie, then what have they been doing with their lives? What have they sacrificed for? But this is where historians get uncomfortable. What happens when the addict realizes he's running out of time? When the emperor looks in the mirror and sees himself aging? When the god starts to feel mortal again? That's when it gets truly dangerous, because the addiction doesn't fade, it intensifies. The need for validation becomes desperate, the cruelty becomes random, the purges become constant. Because if he can't be eternal, at least he can be feared. At least he can be remembered. Qin Shi Huang spent his final years obsessed with immortality. He consumed mercury daily. He isolated himself. He trusted no one. And when he died, his advisors hid his body for weeks. They were terrified of what would happen when the news got out. So they traveled with his corpse, pretended he was still alive, let it rot in the summer heat, all to maintain the illusion just a little longer. That's what power addiction does. It turns people into prisoners. It turns empires into tombs. It turns legacy into horror. And the worst part, it keeps happening. We see the patterns, we study the history, we tell ourselves we've learned, and then we do it again. Because power doesn't just corrupt leaders, it corrupts systems, it corrupts cultures, it corrupts the very idea of what leadership means.
And once that corruption sets in, it's almost impossible to root out. You can kill the emperor, but the throne remains. You can topple the dynasty, but the desire for dynasty remains. You can destroy the palace, but the dream of the palace lives on in the minds of the next generation.
This is why it never ends. Because the addiction isn't in the person, it's in the position, it's in the structure, it's in the human need to believe that someone, somewhere is in control, that someone has the answers, that someone is special enough to lead us. And the moment we give someone that belief, we plant the seed of their destruction and ours. So when does a leader cross the line? When do they stop serving and start consuming? Maybe it's the first time they silence a critic. Maybe it's the first time they rewrite history. Maybe it's the first time they choose their image over the truth. Or maybe the line doesn't exist. Maybe there is no single moment. Maybe it's a slow fade, a gradual shift, 1,000 small compromises that add up to something unrecognizable. Because that's how addiction works. You don't wake up one day and decide to throw your life away. You make one choice, then another, and before you know it, you're ordering soldiers to stab the ocean and calling it victory. The real danger isn't power, it's what greed does to it. Because power, at least, can have a purpose. It can build, it can protect, it can create. But when greed takes over, power becomes consumption. It becomes endless. It becomes a black hole that devours everything. And that's where we're headed next. To the moment when the addiction evolves, when it stops being about control and starts being about taking, when emperors don't just want to be worshipped, they want to own everything, every resource, every body, every soul. That's the next stage, and it's the phase that destroys empires completely.